my beautiful souls, welcome back to Finding with Jessie, the life coach. I hope everybody is feeling fabulous this second week of January. So hopefully you got some nice rest, you recharged your batteries, and you set some intentions. So I actually have a video out now about setting intentions and making space, right? Intentions is all about preparing your mind for what you want to achieve. But if you don't have the space and you're not making space for that energy to come in, then it's actually is a losing battle. So if you haven't checked out the video, go check out that video. It's a little bit of intention setting, a little bit of organizing, and a little bit of getting into alignment. So today we're filming in a different space. I'm actually in my office. I actually have an office and I barely use it. I'm like, why don't I even come in here? I have everything I need. I have my coffee, I have my heater. It's super warm in here. It's freezing in my first level. I guess one of the reasons I was like, let me get my booty up to my office. But today we're going to be speaking about something that is pretty interesting, and it is related to fears. And I've done a video, I actually have another video out about fears being related to trauma, because it is. And it's funny because it took me quite some time to realize that. I was actually just having a conversation recently with one of my best friends, and we were speaking about traumas, right? How one specific situation can actually set the course, and some people let it define their lives. Like recently I had a child that she was having this bully. She was being bullied at school, or she was being bullied at school, and now she's having issues making friends. So when I took her on as a client, I understood that she was, very like a loner, very to herself, and had a hard time making friends. And I didn't know why originally. And then when we spoke about it and I kind of followed the line, it came up to the part that she was being bullied. And because of that whole situation and the impact that has had on her, because it was bullying by friends, kids that she knew, kids that befriended her and then later betrayed her and then became her bully. And because of that, now she's afraid to get close to other kids. So originally she came into counseling. They put her into coaching for confidence building, right? And just to have someone to speak to, and then realize that it was related to trauma. And literally kind of the steps that we're taking is more of trauma coaching. And so that's just one instance, but that's usually what's happening. The people who are coming to me, and they're emotionally blocked for one thing or another, and it's related to their traumas. And that's when I started realizing, wow, like trauma is like this little epidemic, the silent epidemic that nobody talks about, and sometimes we don't even label it trauma because we don't know what trauma really is. Today I'm going to be speaking more about how to work through trauma, things that I use in my coaching practice that helps people bring it up to the surface level. And depending how big the trauma is, the person might need therapy. So when we speak about healing, or when I say specifically healing ourselves, right, I'm speaking about healing the trauma. So this is the thing about healing ourselves. We are all capable of healing ourselves, right? And I'm going to go over some steps that you can do if you are on the healing journey and you need to unpack trauma. But the thing is, a lot of the times we do not see ourselves clearly. So if you're viewing yourself from a trauma lens, that means you're viewing yourself with illusions. And that's the part that you're going to need help with. A lot of people cannot see the illusions. They cannot see the lies and the false narratives they've been telling themselves. If you were able to see that, the trauma wouldn't be there. It wouldn't have a hold on you. So that's what actually keeps the hold, keeps the unhealed process from healing, is the narrative, the story that has been attached to the trauma throughout whatever years this may be. I've said before that a lot of times people overestimate their ability to deal with their own issues and their own traumas, and this is the reason why. Is because trauma is associated with a narrative that is false, is an illusion, and you need someone to be able to see it clearly, someone who could see deeper and look at what you're saying versus your patterns versus your actions. Take that all into consideration and say, there's a lie here, right? And bring that to the surface and bring that into your view so you can actually see it for yourself and say, this is not true, right? And that's when a therapist or a life coach who works with trauma and works with the healing process and spirituality and personal growth and development that can possibly be of help. So right now I'm going to go through the steps. And like I said, if you're on this healing journey, it might be helpful for you. So the first step when dealing with trauma is you are going to need to be vulnerable, and you need to actually take ownership. Now, this is a part that's really hard for a lot of people. And the reason being is because when trauma comes and impacts your life, majority of the time people are fearful to be vulnerable, not only with themselves, but with another. And it's hard for them to take ownership, accountability. And they confuse accountability with blame, and those are two different things. And so the way you do this, the way you become vulnerable and you start taking ownership, is to find your voice. So with trauma, there's two parts of trauma. There's the situation that has happened to you that has created this whole impact. And then there's the aftermath of trauma. And when you find your voice, you start healing the aftermath, because a lot of the times when something traumatic happens to you, our voice gets silenced. So we might silence ourselves, or other people might silence us, right? It's like, shh, don't tell. It might be family dynamics. That's like, let's keep it in the family. Don't repeat this. Don't tell others. Or, family problems, stay within the family dynamics. The public doesn't need to know. You don't need to share this with a friend or a confidant or something of that sort, right? So there's different ways that we've become silenced. But the whole synopsis and point of this whole step one is to find that voice and start speaking about the trauma and owning that the trauma has happened to you. So that's super important. We need to be able to bring out the storyline, right? Talk about those feelings. Talk about how you felt when this has happened to you. Did you feel abandoned? Did you feel alone? Did you feel scared? Did you feel fearful? Did you feel nervous? Did you feel embarrassed? Did you feel humiliated? Those feelings are super important. And they get lodged within our mind and body, and they get stuck, and they change our DNA when we don't find our voice. So it's super important to voice. Let your voice be heard. Speak up for yourself, right? And take that ownership that this has happened to me and it was not okay. Telling your story and finding your voice is super powerful. It holds a lot of weight. It's super important. And it's one of the most important parts and one of the first parts of owning your trauma, of healing yourself, is to find that voice, tell your story, and tell how it impacted you. The second part that's super important to know about trauma is educating yourself on trauma. I've said this before. A lot of people don't understand what trauma is, and they don't realize that situations in their life have been traumatic. So trauma is associated with shame. So anything that creates shame within an individual is going to have a hold on you. And depending how shameful and humiliating the experience was for you, that's going to be the hold and the grip the trauma is going to have on you. Like, for instance, a big one that people don't realize, and we super justify it and we normalize it, is spanking within kids. People don't realize, because they're not educated, and they take a defense to this, especially a parent who spanks their child, because a parent wants the best for their child. And they don't want to hear that something that they are doing is actually creating more issues within a child. But being spanked is a traumatic situation for a child, and it creates a lot of shame. And I'm going to be speaking about this a little bit more in depth in some other videos coming up, so I don't want to get too involved in it, right? But spanking is a form of trauma. Emotional abuse is a form of trauma. Having a narcissistic parent is a form of trauma. Teen abuse is a form of trauma. Bullying is a form of trauma. And there's so many different types of forms. But like I said, people do not associate that with trauma. They associate it with, oh, that's life. That's what happens to us. Everybody goes through this. And actually, no, not everybody does go through that. Majority of the time when we deal with our trauma, we believe that everybody goes through the same thing. And if it's not that, if we don't believe that everybody goes through these type of traumas, we believe that the thing that has happened to us has only happened to us. Like, we separate ourselves as being different, and that's when the shame comes in. So there's two different viewpoints of kind of the way the trauma, how we view it. But nevertheless, educating yourself on trauma is super, super, super important. And that's when the rose-colored glasses comes off the face. The window of knowledge and education, you let that window open, and it starts, blowing towards you, and you start seeing things differently because now you have the education to understand it. What a lot of people don't understand is the psychological depth and impact that trauma has on the brain and the body and in your DNA. Literally, it could change your DNA. It could change the way your mind functions. And a lot of people don't understand that to its depth, especially if you had the trauma in formative years, in developmental stages, when you're really young. It can change the way you view not only the world, but yourself. You start viewing the world and people as being unsafe. So it's super important, once again. If you are on the healing journey, you must and you need to educate yourself on trauma. So I will always suggest either going to a coach that can educate you. That's one of the things I do when I work with my clients. When we talk about situations that had a huge impact on them, I label it trauma, and then I educate them. I speak to them about the education of trauma, because a lot of times they blame themselves for holding themselves back. But what I tell people is, you only know what you know, right? You can't blame yourself for the knowledge base and the understanding and the capacity that you had at a certain particular point, right? And majority of the time when we develop coping mechanisms that are unhealthy, you also can blame yourself for that as well. Because at the moment, you needed that coping mechanism. But when you become more educated and now you are aware, now you're starting off with wisdom. You have the education, and now you have the wisdom to make different choices, right? So it's super important, once again, to understand the education of trauma. It will help with the healing process, and it helps with forgiveness. Not only forgiving yourself, but forgiving the trauma and the people that's involved in the trauma. Third one goes back to kind of a little bit what I said in the first step, and it's all about acceptance. Acceptance. A lot of people deny their trauma. That wasn't a big deal. Whatever. Everybody goes through this. This is normal. I need to be stronger. I shouldn't cry. Whatever it is, people deny their feelings and the trauma, the impact or the hold that it has on them. A lot of people become very surprised to know that what's holding them back is something that happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're like, no, that can't be it. And it's usually it. And that's the funny part. And it's like, I don't understand how this has had a hold on me. And one is because you didn't process it, right? It goes back to that ownership in the beginning and finding your voice. You never realized it was trauma. So if you never realized it was trauma, then you never processed it correctly. If you never process something correctly, guess what? It will come back to haunt you. So that's one part. And then two, they don't understand trauma. They don't understand that situation was so traumatic for them and how it has changed the psychological and emotional makeup of their whole being, and it has created this emotional block. So that's why the education is so important. And then three comes that acceptance. Once you get those 1 and 2 kind of down pack, then you're like, oh, I see that this really was, something that was really impactful in my life. But you learn to accept it, and you learn to say, once again, this was not right, and this has harmed me. And look at everything that it has cost me and everything it has holding me back from. And that's important, because once you accept the trauma and you view it for what it is and how it has a hold on you, then you realize the power that you gave to the trauma, right? The power that the trauma took from you. And now you have to make a conscious decision to take that power back. So accepting it is super important. And that goes into number 4, and acknowledgement. Acknowledgement for everything. The pain, the impact, the dilemmas it has cost you, people's situations, this is the thing. When trauma takes a hold of you, it has cost you a part of yourself. This is another part that people don't realize. Once you release trauma, it changes you, right? So it's actually stolen a part of your life, a part of your happiness, a part of your fulfillment, a part of being free. So acknowledging that is super important, and also acknowledging that there is another way. That's really important to acknowledge, because with trauma comes unhealthy coping mechanisms, or something that's keeping you stuck. It could be something as simple as procrastination, right? Something has happened to you, it has created a trauma within you, and then you procrastinate on certain situations because you don't want that to happen again, right? So just acknowledging that that is so, and acknowledging how the procrastination is linked to the trauma. You got to find the links. You got to find the line. You got to find why and everything, right? So once you acknowledge that, then you start acknowledging, well, there is another way. There is coping mechanisms that are healthy, but how do I once again find that? And that's once again when you're going to need someone who understands coping mechanisms and understands what's healthy and what's unhealthy, and what to substitute one for the other, how to do it, right? How to integrate it into your healing process. Also in that category of acknowledgement is acknowledging how to process the trauma, right? So a lot of the times people are like, okay, I had this, thing that happened to me and I don't know how to process it. And so processing those feelings, going through those emotions, really understanding like what forgiveness is, how forgiveness is for ourselves and not for others. That's super important to really understand. Having compassion not only for ourselves but for others is super important in the healing journey. Like if someone has hurt you and that created a trauma, you have to understand that hurt people. A lot of the times with trauma, we make the other person a villain, and they might be a villain. They're a villain in our story because they harmed us, right? But when you get to the point that you start realizing that the reason why they are a villain, why they've become this way, is because they're hurt, it kind of gives you a different perspective, right? It makes you not want to retaliate or hate so much. It opens your heart to feeling like, wow, I actually feel sorry for this person versus I want to harm this person and hold on to all this pain. So self-compassion goes a really long way, and a lot of people don't understand. They understand what compassion is, but they don't know how to hold compassion for someone who has harmed them, right? Someone who they feel has destroyed their life in one way or another. And that's something else that I help people do within the healing journey, right? Understand all these concepts on a deeper, profound spiritual level. And that's super important. When you heal, it's spiritual. And so you can't have one without the other. It's a journey. It's a spiritual journey. When you heal yourself, it's a spiritual journey.